Today, we're going to explore a framework for thinking that completely transformed one of the world's most powerful companies. We're not just looking at a leader, we are deconstructing a mindset because we believe that to lead better, we first have to learn to think better. Let's begin.
You know, the story of Microsoft's renewal really begins with a paradox. By the time Satya Nadella took over as CEO, the company's incredible success had actually become its biggest obstacle. A culture of rigidity, of looking inward, had set in, and it was stifling the very innovation that made it a giant in the first place.
So this was the fundamental challenge he faced. The problem wasn't a single product or some flawed strategy. The problem was the culture itself. And Nadella's solution, it didn't start with technology. It started with a fundamental question about mindset, about how people approach their work every single day. To really appreciate the transformation, we first have to understand the environment Nadella inherited. It was a landscape defined not so much by external competition, but by internal friction and, really, a pervasive fear of failure. Innovation had just slowed to a crawl. Teams were siloed, competing more with each other than with the market. This culture of fear, it just killed experimentation. And the company became so focused on protecting its existing empires that it completely lost sight of its customers. And here's where Nadella's most critical insight comes in. He realized that the root of the problem wasn't in the code. It wasn't in the hardware. It was in the company's collective mindset. This was a human problem, not a technical one.
This right here, this illustrates the absolute core of his approach. He understood that before you can change what a company does, you first have to profoundly change how its people think. You see, strategy, products, innovation, all of that is downstream from culture.
So that brings us to the foundational pillar of his transformation. It was a simple yet incredibly powerful shift from what he called a know-it-all culture to a learn-it-all culture, a shift from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset.
With this one idea, Nadella completely reframed his own role. He wasn't the chief decision-maker, he was the chief curator of the culture. He made curiosity and continuous learning the most valued traits in the company. Not as signs of weakness, but as the essential fuel for relevance and innovation in a world that's always changing.
Just look at the contrast here. It's stark. The fixed mindset, it avoids challenges and it ignores feedback. It's a closed loop that protects the ego but totally prevents growth. The growth mindset, on the other hand, embraces challenges and learns from criticism. It's an engine for continuous improvement that sees criticism not as a threat but as a gift.
Now let's be really clear here. This is not just about having a positive attitude. It is a fundamental belief system that redefines a person's entire relationship with challenge and effort. It's that internal conviction that your capabilities aren't fixed, but that they can be cultivated. Okay, so with that learning mindset starting to take root, Nadella introduced the next core principle, empathy. And he positioned it not as some soft skill, but as the core technology that would drive Microsoft's future. I mean, what a powerful way to frame it. Nadella argued that to build products people truly love, you first have to develop a deep, almost obsessive understanding of their unmet and even unarticulated needs. Empathy, that becomes the starting point for all innovation. So empathy becomes this disciplined practice. It's not a passive feeling, it's an active process. You listen to understand, you connect with the real-world challenges of your customers, and then, and only then, do you create solutions. The customer's perspective becomes the actual driver of your strategy.
So, if a leader's job is to foster this culture of learning and empathy, what does that really look like in practice? How does it actually change the act of leadership?
Well, the whole focus shifts from that old top-down command and control style. The leader's primary function becomes creating the conditions, the environment, where the best ideas can emerge from anywhere in the organization.
This is a question for every leader to really reflect on. You see, a manager who just pulls levers is focused on direct inputs and predictable outputs. But a leader who acts like a gardener, while they nurture, they remove obstacles, and they provide the right conditions for growth, trusting the potential that already exists within their team.
And that very shift, from lever puller to gardener, is how a leader becomes the chief architect of culture. Nadella's story demonstrates this truth so powerfully. A company's culture is its long-term operating system. It dictates how people behave when no one is watching.
We study how leaders think, so we can all approach our work with more intention. So I'll leave you with this to reflect on. What is the one core belief that guides your decisions, your actions, and the environment you create? Because your answer to that, it really defines the kind of leader you are and the one you're becoming.
All right, let's be clear. This isn't just some dusty corporate history lesson. No, this is a strategic breakdown of a really profound danger, the danger of success itself. We're going to dive deep into how the very thing that builds an empire can, and often does, become its greatest weakness.
Think about that for a second. Success. It feels good, right? But it can be a drug. The very foundation of an empire can become the poison that brings it right to its knees. This is a critical lesson, one we all need to learn, about what happens when victory makes you vulnerable.
So here's the first major realization we need to have. A company's collapse, it almost never starts with a competitor on the outside. It starts on the inside. It begins with a kind of cultural sickness, a slow, creeping decay that sets in the exact moment an organization starts believing its own press. And you can see the domino effect right here. I mean, think about it. First, you've got this absolute dominance in the 90s. That breeds this dangerous monopoly mindset. What does that lead to? Well, it fuels this destructive internal war. Teams just stopped working together. They started hoarding information, working in their own little silos. And the result? Exactly what you'd expect. Innovation just ground to a halt. And at the very heart of all of it was one single corrosive problem. Ego had completely replaced curiosity. And let's be really, really clear about what this monopoly mindset is. It's not about market share. Not really. It's a cultural disease. It's that exact moment a leadership team stops asking what if and starts declaring we already know. And that, right there, is the blind spot. That's what causes you to completely miss the next revolution, because you're too busy admiring your last one. Silos. It's such a simple word, isn't it? But it represents such a destructive force. Look, when your best people are spending their energy competing with each other instead of the actual market, you don't have a team. You just have a collection of internal rivals. Information gets stuck, great ideas die on the vine. It's a perfect example of how an organization's own structure can become its biggest enemy. Okay, so let's make this personal. I want you to apply this to your own world, to your own career. What's the Windows monopoly on your team? You know that one big success story that everyone always points to? The one that might just be blinding you to what's really coming next. And this brings us to the next important realization. That internal dysfunction, it's never contained. It always spills outward. The sickness inside the company walls eventually shows up as catastrophic failure out in the real world, in the marketplace. And the consequences, they were severe and they were very public. I mean, missing the entire mobile revolution, that wasn't just some accident. It was a direct symptom of that old PC-focused monopoly mindset. Those failed acquisitions, they weren't just bad business deals. They were desperate Hail Marys, attempts to buy the innovation the culture couldn't create on its own anymore. Your best people start to check out. The whole organization becomes terrified of taking risks. And then, the final blow, the very customers who built your success start to drift away. So this is the fundamental choice every single leader has to make. You see it right here. On one side, you have an ego culture that basically worships the past. On the other, a learning culture that's obsessed with the future. The ego culture, it punishes failure. The learning culture, it sees failure as crucial data, something to learn from. This isn't just some textbook theory. This is the real operational difference between stagnation and growth. And this is the turning point. Real, lasting transformation, it is absolutely impossible without a moment of just brutal honesty. You simply cannot solve a problem that you refuse to see. The very first step toward building a true learning culture is that sober, difficult awareness that your ego culture is failing. So I'll leave you with this final thought. Every leader, every team, frankly, every single one of us has a truth that we're avoiding. What is yours? Because having the courage to face that truth, well, that isn't the end of the story. That is the very beginning of your transformation.
You know, we often think of leadership as a title, a position on a business card. But what if it's something deeper? What if true leadership is actually an internal transformation? It's this fundamental shift in perspective that completely redefines your impact. And that's the core realization we are going to unpack today.
And boom, with this one simple idea, Satya Nadella gave all of us a brand new operating system for leadership. He was declaring that if you want to transform a company, you have to transform its culture first. And that change, well, it absolutely has to begin at the very top.
So, here's our first big takeaway. This is crucial. Real leadership isn't something you just learn in a classroom. It's forged by life itself. To truly grasp Nadella's strategy, you first have to understand his story.
Okay, so at his core, Nadella's foundation is that engineer's mind. You know the type. He sees the world in systems. He thinks in logic. And this provides an incredibly solid, structured framework for everything else that follows.
But here's the thing. Logic alone just doesn't cut it. His engineer's brain is fused with something else, a poet's appreciation for nuance and a cricketer's grasp of long-term strategy. It's this combination that allows him to see not just the machine, but the people who are actually running it. And then life happened. His most profound transformation wasn't in a boardroom, it was deeply personal. As a father to a son with special needs, he learned a whole new language, the language of empathy. And that experience completely rewired his perspective in a way that no business challenge ever could.
So you see, this is the complete picture. You have the engineer's precision, the poet's perspective, and the father's empathy, all coming together. This isn't some generic leadership playbook you buy at the airport. This is leadership forged in the fires of a real life.
So let's turn this back to you for a second. Think about your own story, all those unique challenges, those passions. They are not separate from your professional life. They are the raw material of your leadership. The real question is, how are you shaping them into the leader you are becoming?
Which brings us to the critical question. How does something so deeply personal, a personal journey, end up redefining a global corporation? Let's connect that inner work to the outer results.
Okay, here is the next important realization, and this one is a game changer. Empathy is not a soft skill. Let me say that again. It is not a soft skill. It is a strategic superpower. It is the engine that drives innovation and builds a resilient, high-performing culture.
This right here is the mindset shift in action. It's moving from commanding to listening, from judging to actually understanding, from focusing on process to focusing on people, and from obsessing over strategy to building the culture. This is the tactical change you have to implement in your own leadership.
And here's the crucial point, the one thing you cannot negotiate on. Process follows people. Strategy follows culture. Think about it. All of your brilliant plans are completely irrelevant if your people are not engaged and valued. This is the principle. Get the culture right first, period.
Ultimately, when you boil it all down, it comes back to this one simple, powerful truth. Leadership begins inside. The external results you get are just a direct reflection of your internal work. Your organization simply cannot grow beyond your own development. It all begins with you.
Nadella's story proves that your greatest leadership strengths is often born from your most personal experiences. So the final question isn't about him. It's for you. What part of your story will define your leadership?
Let's start with this. This is the fundamental truth of modern leadership. Your job isn't just about managing tasks or hitting numbers. Your real job is to be the chief architect of your team's culture, because from that, everything else of value flows.
So today, we're diving into something big, a profound transformation. We're not talking about small tweaks. We're talking about a complete cultural overhaul. This is the Learn It All revolution, and it's all about how you, as a leader, can remake your organization from the inside out.
First things first, we have to identify the real enemy. And let me tell you, it's not your competition, it's not the market. The biggest threat is internal. It's the know-it-all mindset. And it is the single greatest threat to your growth.
Think about it like this. There are two basic operating systems for culture. On one side, you've got the know-it-all culture. The goal there? Prove you're the smartest person in the room. It's all driven by ego. On the other side is the learn-it-all culture. Here, the goal is totally different. It's to stay curious, to actually get smarter. That's driven by growth. One is brittle, the other is resilient.
So, here's the crucial question. Which culture are you operating in right now? And even more importantly, which one are you actively creating? Think about your last team meeting. Was the energy about defending old ideas or discovering new ones? Just realizing the difference. That's the first critical step.
All right, so we've identified the problem. Now let's pivot to the solution, the Learn It All revolution. And this isn't some abstract theory. It's built on 3 specific, tangible behaviors that drive all meaningful growth. This is where leadership moves from idea to action.
The first behavior is a profound shift. It's moving from assertion to inquiry. You have to ask better questions.
The most valuable person in the room is no longer the one with all the answers. The most valuable person is the one who asks the question that unlocks a new perspective for everyone else. That is the ultimate sign of confident leadership.
The second behavior, this one feels counterintuitive, but it is absolutely critical. You must fail faster. In a know-it-all culture, a failure is a threat. In a learn-it-all culture, failure is just data. It's a stepping stone. The goal isn't to avoid failure, it's to accelerate the learning that comes from it. The key insight here is that your speed of recovery is far more valuable than your avoidance of error.
And those two behaviors feed directly into the third, which is your ultimate competitive advantage, learning faster. See, asking better questions creates new options. Failing faster provides rapid feedback. Together, they create a cycle that lets your team adapt at a pace your competitors just can't match. Here's the real takeaway. Learning is the new bottom line.
So why is this shift so difficult, especially for organizations that are already successful? Well, it's because success can be a trap. It can make you close-minded. It can make you stop learning. Your past victories become this kind of proof that your old playbook will work forever. The learn-it-all mindset is the only antidote.
But these behaviors, asking, failing, and learning, they can't survive in a vacuum. They need a specific foundation to grow on. This brings us to psychological safety. Think of it as the essential architecture for a true learning culture.
So what is psychological safety? At its core, it's a shared belief across the team that it's safe to take interpersonal risks. It's the bedrock of trust that allows people to be vulnerable. Without it, the learn-it-all mindset is just a theory. With it, it becomes an active daily practice.
This architecture is built on three simple pillars. Your team has to feel safe to speak up with a dissenting opinion. They have to feel safe to experiment with a new, unproven idea. And crucially, they have to feel safe to fail when that experiment doesn't work out. Does your team feel safe to do these three things? That is the diagnostic question for every leader. And when you establish these conditions, the outcomes aren't just feelings, they are tangible business metrics. Innovation increases because people are finally willing to take smart risks. Engagement rises because people feel valued enough to invest their full energy. These are the strategic outcomes every single one of us is chasing.
And let's be perfectly clear about this. Psychological safety is not about being nice. It's not about avoiding conflict or lowering your standards. It's the exact opposite. It's the prerequisite for the candid feedback and the productive disagreement that truly drive high performance. This isn't a soft skill, it is a competitive strategy.
So we've talked about the mindset, we've talked about the environment. Now let's bring it all back to you. This is about your leadership mindset shift, your personal transition from knowing to learning.
Understand this. This is not just a corporate strategy to be deployed on a team. It is your personal growth strategy. The principles that transform a company's culture are the exact same principles that will accelerate your career. Your ability to embrace curiosity, learn from failure, and create safety for others is your primary asset as a modern leader. Which brings us to the final, most important question for you. Take a moment for some honest reflection. Where in your leadership and in your life do you need to stop knowing and start learning? Your answer to that question is the beginning of your own revolution.
We're not just talking about a corporate turnaround here. We're deconstructing a leadership mindset, a model that you can apply directly to your own growth. This is the Nadella Blueprint. It's about transformation, whether you're leading a company, a team, or just yourself. Let's dive in. Right here, this is the core insight. For a company that literally built its empire on code, Nadella's first big move was to say the real operating system isn't Windows, it's the people. So the revolution didn't start with a new product, it started with a new principle. And that's where any real transformation has to begin. And this brings us to the first critical realization. See, when Nadella took over, Microsoft wasn't failing. It was a titan. But its own incredible success had created a really dangerous side effect, a growth ceiling. Your past wins are never, ever a guarantee of future relevance. Think about that for a second. The biggest threat to Microsoft's future wasn't some other company. It was coming from inside the building. Success had built these invisible walls between divisions, making teams compete against each other instead of the actual market. Innovation wasn't being shared, it was being hoarded. This is the trap every successful organization has to fight. So this is the big question, isn't it? When the very structure of the organization is the problem, where do you even begin? Do you push for new products, a new strategy? It's a tough call. Put yourself in that chair for a moment. Where would you start? Well, here's the answer. The foundational realization. You don't start with what's happening on the outside. You start with the internal operating system, your culture. Because a broken culture is going to reject any new strategy you try to install on it. The change has to start from the inside out. This is the new code. And look, this isn't just a list of buzzwords for a poster on the wall. These are the actual behaviors you need. Collaboration becomes a requirement, not a suggestion. And trust becomes the currency that buys you speed and real innovation. This is how you start tearing down those walls. And this right here, this is the single most important shift a leader, or anyone really, can make. Moving from a culture of know-it-alls, where you have to defend what you know, to a culture of learn-it-alls, which is all about curiosity. It's no longer about being right. It's about getting it right. Together. Okay, now watch what happens next. Here's the outward realization. Once that internal culture started to heal, it unlocked the ability to create a totally new identity for the company on the outside. See, a healthy culture doesn't just support your strategy, it pretty much is your strategy. You see the logic here, right? You can't be customer-obsessed if your own teams are just obsessed with beating each other. You can't be cloud-first if your different divisions refuse to collaborate. That internal shift toward collaboration, it made all of this not just possible, but completely inevitable. Let that one sink in for a second. This is a principle you can take to work tomorrow. Your team's output, your career path, they are all just reflections of the underlying culture and mindset. You fix the inside, the outside takes care of itself. Which brings us to the final, and I think the most important realization of all. This whole story, it isn't just about Microsoft. It's a blueprint for your growth. Every principle here applies directly to your decisions, your habits, and your career. So I'm going to ask you directly, be really honest with yourself. What is the one know-it-all habit you defend? The belief you hold on to because you think you've already got it all figured out. Just identifying it, that is the hardest and most important step to becoming a learn-it-all. And here's your call to action. To unlearn something, you need new input. So whose perspective are you not hearing? Whose ideas could really challenge your assumptions? Make a plan to seek that person out this week. And your only goal is not to debate them, but to actually listen. Because ultimately, that's what this blueprint teaches us. True growth, real leadership, it doesn't come from having all the answers. It comes from having the curiosity to keep asking better questions. Questions for your team, for your customers, and, most importantly, for yourself. That's where your transformation really begins.
You know, some strategies are built for the next business quarter. This one is built for the next century. So today, we're going to deconstruct a blueprint that's so much more than just AI. It's really a leadership philosophy for right now. It's a mindset that you can adopt starting today.
Okay, let's be crystal clear about this. What you're looking at right here, this is the single most important partnership of the next decade. And understanding this relationship, it isn't just an option anymore. It's the core skill for staying relevant in your career from this day forward. Every great building, every great company, it starts with a blueprint. So let's start there. Let's examine the architectural plan, that forward-thinking vision for how we're all going to work. This is the what.
So these are the core pillars of the strategy. But I want you to focus on just one of them, because one of these ideas completely changes the game. It's the emotional intelligence that's baked right into the plan, this concept of AI as a co-pilot.
And right there, that's the fundamental mindset shift. The entire conversation moves away from a fear of being replaced to a focus on amplification. See, this isn't about what you can no longer do, it's about what you can do, but faster and so much better. So ask yourself this. What could a dedicated co-pilot change in your own daily workflow right now?
A powerful vision that's incredibly motivating. But a vision by itself is fragile, isn't it? And this brings us to the next critical realization. What's the foundation? What makes this entire vision sustainable, trustworthy, and actually real? All right, so we've seen the what, the big vision. Now we have to look at the how. And honestly, this is the most critical part of the entire blueprint. The principles that make sure this technology serves us and not the other way around.
And this just lays it out so brilliantly.
These are not abstract ideas you hang on a wall. They are active, daily requirements. For any real leader, fairness isn't just a goal, it's a design constraint from day one. Transparency isn't some corporate policy, it's a daily practice. And accountability, well, accountability is simply non-negotiable.
And here's the crucial point. These principles, this is the bedrock of any innovation that's going to last. We're not talking about short-term fixes or chasing quick wins here. We're talking about building a legacy of trust. And that's the difference between temporary success and having an enduring impact.
Just let that sink in for a moment. All the strategy, all the innovation, all the productivity gains, they are completely meaningless and potentially really harmful if they aren't guided by a strong ethical core. Technology is a tool, that's all it is. Our values are what determine its purpose.
So, in the end, this blueprint is more than a business strategy. It's a challenge. It's a challenge for you to lead with empathy, to put learning ahead of ego, and to build for the long term. So as you leave this, the real question isn't about the technology at all. It's about your leadership. What core principle will guide your next important decision?
Today, we're not just going to talk about leadership. We are going to deconstruct the actual operating system of one of the most transformative leaders of our time, Satya Nadella. Now, this isn't a biography. Think of it as a playbook. We're going to break down his mindset into a framework that you can use to architect your own growth. Let's dive in. So let's start with a really foundational question. And I want you to take a second and actually think about this. Whether you're leading a massive company, a small team, or maybe just yourself, what is your single most important job? What is the one thing you are truly there to do? And here it is. This is the first critical realization. Your job is not to be the smartest person in the room. It's not to have every single answer. Your job is to generate two things: clarity, especially when things are confusing, and energy when things feel stuck. This is the core pivot from being a know-it-all to a learn-it-all. And trust me, that one shift changes absolutely everything.
Okay, so once you really internalize that new mindset, your actions have to change too, right? Thinking differently isn't enough. You've got to start acting differently. And this brings us to the first practical application of that thinking, the servant leader's playbook.
This right here, this illustrates the fundamental choice that every single modern leader has to make. You've got the old model, command and control, directing, managing, telling. But then there's the new model, the one Nadella built into Microsoft's DNA, and that's coach and empower. It's the huge difference between telling someone what to do and helping them figure out how to think. One creates followers, the other cultivates more leaders. So how do you actually pull this off? It really boils down to these 4 non-negotiable actions. First, you remove obstacles. You clear the path for your people. Second, you empower your teams with real ownership. Third, you guide with questions, not with orders. And fourth, you coach people to develop their skills. You don't just manage their task list. Look, this isn't just a list of nice ideas. This is the operating manual. And this can't be some abstract theory. The work starts right now. I want you to think of one person on your team. Got them? Okay. Who can you give more authority to this week? What roadblock can you personally get out of their way? Who are you going to coach instead of just command? You have to make it real. This is exactly how the transformation actually begins.
This empathetic, empowering mindset, it goes way beyond just managing people. It's actually the foundation for making powerful, resilient, strategic decisions. It's the difference between being a firefighter who's constantly reacting and becoming an architect who is intentionally building the future.
Any truly strategic decision has to balance 3 key things. First, you have the data. What does the evidence actually say? Second, you have the people. Who does this impact, and how will they feel about it? And third, you have time. Does this build our long-term future, or is it really just a short-term fix? See, most leaders tend to lean on just one of these. A truly great leader integrates all 3 every time. But that whole decision-making framework, it's totally useless without this one thing: calm. This is the absolute, non-negotiable emotional foundation. Why? Because panic creates blind spots. Haste forces you into short-term thinking. Calm is the platform that strategic clarity is built on. It's what allows you to see the entire board. And this brings us right back to the core job of a leader. As Nadella himself said, the most important attribute that any leader needs to have is to create clarity when none exists. That is your ultimate value. A balanced framework operated from a state of calm, that is precisely how you manufacture that clarity out of chaos. So, let's put this all together into your personal blueprint. These principles we've talked about, empowerment, empathy, a long-term vision, they aren't just tactics you can use. They are the core components of a brand new leadership operating system. This is your framework for intentional growth. This really is the journey of a modern leader. It's a move from ego to empathy, from the impulse to command to the discipline to coach, from the temptation of the short-term fix to the wisdom of a long-term vision, and from the reactivity of haste to the strength of calm. This is the transformation. And we're going to end where we began, with a direct question for you. We've laid out the blueprint. Now it's all about commitment. Look at the shifts on this screen. Which one of these is the most critical for you right now? What is the single change you are going to commit to making starting today? Your answer to that question, well, that's where your next chapter truly begins. Today, we're not just talking about a corporate comeback story. No, what we're doing is breaking down a masterclass in modern leadership. This is a blueprint, a real blueprint for transformation that you can start applying right now. All right, let's get into it. Just look at this number, over $2 trillion. That's the amount of market value added since Satya Nadella took over as CEO of Microsoft. Just take a second and let that sink in. This isn't just good growth. This is one of the biggest, most incredible value creations in the history of business, period. So what happened here? Was this just luck? Right place, right time, catching the right wave in tech? Or was it something much, much deeper, something intentional, a fundamental shift in what it even means to lead? That's the real question we're digging into today. So here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at the what, the trillion-dollar question. Then, the foundational shift that made it all possible. After that, we'll talk about leadership's new currency. And finally, we'll put it all together into your leadership blueprint. All right, section 1. Here's our first big realization. Before we can ever understand how this happened, we've got to be crystal clear on what happened. We are talking about a turnaround for the history books, and honestly, the results, they really do speak for themselves. So you look at the pillars of this revival, and they're huge. You've got total dominance in the cloud with Azure. You have these massive, brilliant acquisitions like GitHub and LinkedIn, and of course, the stock growth has just been off the charts. But here's the key. These are all the effects. They aren't the cause. The real story, the one that matters to you as a leader, is what happened before any of this became a reality. So that leads to the real question, doesn't it? How do you actually architect a transformation on this scale? I mean, it's not really about the cloud or the specific acquisitions. It's about the underlying operating system of the entire company. How do you get a team, a massive team, to achieve all of this? And that question brings us to what I think is the single most important insight of this whole discussion. This is the one foundational shift, the one realization that had to happen before any strategic decision was made, before any new product was launched, before a single dollar of that $2 trillion valuation was created. This is it. The C in CEO stands for culture. Now, that's not just some clever line for a press conference. For Satya Nadella, this is a core strategic doctrine. He understood that his primary job wasn't just chief executive officer, it was chief culture officer. Everything, and I mean everything, started right there. Just look at this order. This completely flips the traditional business playbook on its head, right? Most leaders, they start with strategy. They lock themselves in a room, come up with a plan, and then try to force the execution. Nadella's doctrine is crystal clear. You build the culture first. Because a healthy culture, well, that's the only soil where a great strategy can actually take root and grow. So let this sink in. Strategy isn't the starting point. It's the output. Your best strategy doesn't come out of a formal meeting. It emerges, almost naturally, from a culture built on curiosity and trust. The right environment produces the right strategy. Now, think about what that means for how you run your team. Okay, so if culture is the foundation, what's that culture actually built on? Well, it's built on what I'd call leadership's new currency. And it's a huge shift, a move away from the old idea that the leader has to be the smartest person in the room. And this chart just lays it out perfectly. The two mindsets. On one side, you've got the know-it-all culture. It's all about defending your ego, fearing failure, having all the answers. And on the other side, you have the learn-it-all culture, seeking truth, embracing failures as lessons, asking the right questions instead of just giving answers. So be honest with yourself for a second. Which side of this chart sounds more like your team? Which side sounds more like you? So what's the engine that drives a learn-it-all culture? It's empathy. But let's be really clear here. We're not talking about empathy as some soft, nice-to-have skill. In business, in leadership, empathy is a strategic tool. It's how you collect the most important data you can possibly get, understanding what your customers really need and what your team is really thinking. And this brings everything right back to you and your leadership style. So I want you to really think about this. When you walk into a room, are you creating psychological safety? Do people feel like they can bring you their problems, their questions, even their half-baked ideas? Or does your presence create pressure to always be right, which just leads to silence? The answer to that question, well, that's what's defining your culture right now. All right, this brings us to our final and honestly most important section. We've deconstructed the model, now it's time to make it yours. Let's talk about your leadership blueprint. How do you stop just managing and start becoming the architect of the culture you want? Here are the principles. It's actually pretty simple. First, mindset. Every single day, you have to make the choice to learn, not just to be right. Second, lead with empathy. Seek to understand before you try to direct. Third, remember the doctrine. Culture comes before strategy. Build the right environment, and the right strategy will show up. And finally, think long-term. Your culture is the only true competitive advantage you have. And in the end, this is really what it all boils down to. Look, products come and go. Markets are going to shift. But the culture you create, that environment where people feel safe enough to learn, to fail, and to truly innovate, that is your legacy. That's the thing that lasts. So I'm going to leave you with a direct challenge. A culture is either built by design or it happens by default. So be the architect. My question for you is this. What is the one conversation you will start this week to intentionally build the culture you want? That first conversation, that's where the real work begins.
All right, today we're opening the playbook of a truly transformational leader. But look, this isn't just theory. This is a blueprint for intentional, strategic growth in your own career. Let's get into it. Everything starts right here. Before the strategy, before the product, there's the culture. And you know what culture really is? It's just the sum of our mindsets. This idea from Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella is the absolute key to unlocking potential, not just in a massive company, but inside you.
So here's the first important realization. Before you can build anything new, you have to recognize what's holding you back. And the biggest threat, it's a hidden one. It's stagnation that's disguised as expertise. This image, it really says it all. It represents a massive transformation. On one side, you have a culture of know-it-alls. Brilliant people, sure, but rigid, territorial, and fiercely competitive with each other. And on the other side, a culture of learn-it-alls. Curious, collaborative, and absolutely hungry for growth. That shift, right there, from knowing to learning, that's the entire game. Just let that sink in for a second. Failure teaches you something. Arrogance, which is really the heart of that know-it-all mindset, insists there is nothing left to learn. It is the silent killer of innovation, of careers, and of relevance. So, let's pause for a moment of honest reflection. Where in your own work, maybe a project you're on or a meeting you're in, where is that know-it-all reflex preventing a real breakthrough? And that leads us to our second big realization. The solution here isn't some new tactic or buzzword. It's a fundamental shift in your internal operating system. The engine that drives every single action you take.
This is the core concept. It's really simple. A fixed mindset sees talent as this finite thing you either have or you don't. But a growth mindset, it sees talent as a muscle to be trained. One leads to being defensive, the other leads to resilience and just relentless improvement. The crucial point is, which one are you actively choosing moment to moment? And make no mistake about it, this choice isn't just some passive preference. It actively dictates how you respond to a challenge, how you process feedback, and ultimately, the entire trajectory of your professional life. It truly is your personal OS.
Now for the third realization. How do we actually execute on this new mindset? Well, the answer is surprisingly human. The user interface for a learn-it-all culture is empathy.
It's the ability to see the world through another person's eyes, a customer, a colleague, even a competitor.
Look, theory is valuable, but action is decisive. So if a growth mindset is the operating system, what are the apps we need to be running every single day? How do you actually put this into practice?
Here it is. This is the tactical playbook. It starts with curiosity. That means asking questions instead of just giving answers. It requires you to build genuine empathy. It demands real collaboration, continuous learning, and a deep-seated adaptability to change. And let's be clear, these are not soft skills. These are strategic imperatives.
So think about it. Not next quarter, not next week, but tomorrow. What is the one principle you can consciously put into practice in your very next meeting? Because that is how a real shift begins.
Okay, let's move to our fourth realization. Why does all of this matter more right now than ever before? Well, because the landscape is changing at a speed we've never seen, and it's all being driven by technology and AI.
This is the stark reality of our world. The technical skill you just mastered last year, it might be obsolete by next year. So relying only on what you already know is frankly a losing strategy.
Your mindset, however, your capacity to learn and then unlearn and then relearn, that is the enduring asset. That's what gives you professional longevity.
In an age where AI can process data faster than any human ever could, our uniquely human qualities, they become our strategic advantage. Our ability to think critically, to connect different ideas, to show empathy, to collaborate creatively, that's the new currency. Humans still matter because our thinking is the advantage. And this is the essential takeaway. It's not about knowing a specific coding language or a marketing framework. It's about building the meta skill of adaptation. That is the only real job security there is.
So let's bring it all together. This isn't just some interesting case study to talk about. It is a direct call to action for your own professional development.
The principles that transformed one of the world's largest companies are the exact same principles that can transform your career. This has been a framework to help you think better and to grow intentionally.
So we end with a challenge for you. I want you to identify one deeply held belief about your work, your industry, or even yourself that you've always treated as a fact. And this week, consciously challenge it. Ask yourself, what if the complete opposite were true? That question, that is where real growth begins.
Today, we're not just going to talk about leadership, we're going to deconstruct it. We're going to look at the actual blueprints used by three of the most important architects of our time to build empires that last. Let's get started.
So let's start with the one question every single leader has to face. How are the companies that truly last? The ones that define industries? How are they actually built? What's the fundamental principle that separates the temporary from the timeless?
And here is the first critical realization. The greatest companies, they aren't just managed. They are meticulously, intentionally, and frankly, ruthlessly designed. They are architected. And to be an effective architect, you have to master three distinct pillars. Our first architect is a master of the most fundamental pillar of all, vision. This is the why. It's that unshakable North Star that guides every single action, every decision, and every single trade-off you make. And the master architect of vision was, of course, Steve Jobs. You have to understand, his primary tool wasn't code, it wasn't hardware, it was an incredibly clear, uncompromising vision for what Apple was, what it was not, and the dent it was going to make in the universe. See, for Jobs, vision was really an act of exclusion. It was a filter. It was born from this deep, deep conviction that the only thing that mattered was product excellence. And that clarity gave him the courage to say no over and over and over again, ensuring every bit of energy served one singular powerful purpose: to build something insanely great. So let's connect his thinking directly to your work. Is your vision clear enough to tell you what you must say no to, even when it's a perfectly good idea? Does your team feel that clarity so deeply that they can make the right call when you're not even in the room? That right there is the Jobs test. Okay, so a powerful vision is the blueprint, right? But it's worthless without an engine to bring it to life, especially at scale. This brings us to our next pillar, the architecture of systems. This is the engine of how. And the master architect here is Jeff Bezos. You see, if Jobs was obsessed with the why, Bezos was absolutely obsessed with the how. He knew that greatness isn't just a product of some heroic effort every now and then. No, it is the inevitable result of scalable, repeatable, and relentless systems. Now, this is a huge insight. Bezos built Amazon not by managing people, but by architecting mechanisms. Things like the flywheel, the 6-page memos, the 2 pizza teams. These weren't just weird quirks. They were brilliant pieces of engineering designed to remove human error and drive execution at a scale the world had never even seen before. So I want you to turn this lens on your own world. When you're making decisions, are you just solving today's problem? Or are you building the system that solves this entire class of problem forever? Are your processes designed to get stronger under pressure, or do they just crack? All right, so you can have a brilliant vision, a perfect engine, but both of them will eventually fail if they're built on a weak foundation. And that foundation is culture. This is the who. This is the human operating system that powers everything else. The modern master of this is, without a doubt, Satya Nadella. When he took over as CEO of Microsoft, the vision was all over the place and the systems were basically at war with each other. He didn't start by fixing the blueprint or the engine. No, he started by rebuilding the foundation itself, the company's culture. What Nadella did was transform Microsoft from a culture of know-it-alls to a culture of learn-it-alls. He architected an environment that was built on empathy and a growth mindset, and that, in turn, unlocked all of the collaboration and innovation that had been lying dormant for a decade. So the question for your own leadership is this: does your culture actually reward curiosity and learning from failure, or does it demand that your people pretend they already have all the answers? Because the environment you build is going to dictate the results you get, period. Now, all of this brings us to a really critical shift in how we think about this. Understanding these individual architects is vital, but to apply their lessons today, you have to recognize that the very definition of leadership, it's fundamentally changed. The old blueprint is broken. As you can see, the old model was all about command. The leader had the answers and gave the orders. The new model, well, it's about collaboration. The leader's job now is to create an environment where the best ideas can come from anywhere, from anyone. Leadership also used to be driven by ego. My vision, my success. Today, it has to be driven by empathy. The focus shifts away from the leader's personal brilliance to a deep, genuine understanding of the customer's needs and, just as importantly, the team's potential. And finally, we see this absolutely essential evolution from control to trust. Micromanagement is the death of scale and innovation. The modern architect's job isn't to control every brick being laid, but to build a foundation of trust that empowers their team to build incredible things on their own. So, where does this leave you, the aspiring architect? We've studied the masters of vision, systems, and culture. We've seen how the leadership model itself has evolved. The final and most crucial step is synthesis. It's about drawing your own blueprint. And here's the ultimate takeaway. You can't just be a Jobs or a Bezos or a Nadella. The challenge of modern leadership is to be all three. It means integrating a powerful why for direction with a relentless how for execution, all built on a foundation of a who that is empowered to learn and to grow. This is not a menu you can pick from. It is the complete design. Look, we do this to help you think with more clarity and grow with real intention. The blueprints from these masters are right here for you to study. The building materials are your mindset, your decisions, your daily habits. So the only question left is, what kind of architect will you be? What will you choose to build? All right, let's get right to it. The leadership playbook that got you to where you are today, it's obsolete. In a world being rewritten by AI and constant change, the old rules aren't just outdated. They're a liability. We need a new strategic mandate. And it's not just for getting ahead, it's for survival. So I want you to ask yourself a really fundamental question about your career right now. Is your leadership playbook built for yesterday's world or tomorrow's? Is your mindset a relic of the past, or is it a compass that's actually pointed toward the future? Because the answer to that question is going to define everything that comes next for you. So where do we start? This is the first and, honestly, the most critical realization. The path to becoming a future-ready leader starts right here at the foundation. It's about a profound mindset shift, one that people like Satya Nadella have championed. It's the move from the ego of knowing it all to the quiet confidence of learning it all. Now, this completely redefines what we mean by learning. This isn't about passively consuming more information. No, this is an active, strategic process. It's the discipline of unlearning, of having the courage to dismantle the old mental models that are no longer serving you, to make room for what's essential now. This is how you stay relevant, period. I want you to think of this as your new professional operating system. It replaces that fragile ego with a real, quiet humility. It stops seeing uncertainty as a threat and starts seeing it as an opportunity. It's what builds resilient teams. And let's be absolutely clear on this last point. Your capacity to learn faster than everyone else, well, that's your only true, sustainable, long-term advantage. So here's your first challenge, a personal one. I want you to really think about it. What is the one belief you're holding on to about your industry, about your team, maybe about yourself that might actually be holding you back? What's the one thing you need to unlearn this quarter? Okay, once that foundation is in place, we can move to the next level, amplification. And here's the next big realization for you. This is about fundamentally changing your relationship with technology. You have to stop seeing AI as just another tool and start seeing it as your strategic collaborator. You have to make this mental leap. The old view is so tactical, right? AI automates stuff, it spits out answers, it follows commands. But the new view is strategic. It augments your thinking. It helps you ask better, sharper questions. It's a partner you actually create with. You see the difference? It changes the entire game. Let's be crystal clear on this point. This fear of being replaced by AI, it's the wrong way to think about it. The strategic goal isn't to compete against AI. The goal is to make yourself utterly irreplaceable because of how you leverage AI to elevate your own judgment, your own creativity, and your own leadership. So we have the foundation, we have the amplifier, but now we've got to add the one element technology can never ever replicate. Here is the next important realization. Level 3 is the differentiator. This is all about leading with your most uniquely human asset, emotional intelligence. And let's be very precise here. Emotional intelligence is not a soft skill. It is a core strategic competency. It's the raw ability to perceive, to understand, and to influence the emotional current running through your organization. And why does that matter? Because it's how you build trust, how you inspire real action, and how you navigate the messy human dynamics that drive every single business outcome. Think about it. We are swimming in a world of infinite data. Empathy is what gives that data context and meaning. In a world of automation, trust is the new currency. And you gotta remember this. You cannot code influence. You can't code inspiration. You can't code psychological safety. This is your ultimate unfair advantage. All right, we have the foundation, we have the amplifier, and we have the human differentiator. Now we reach the apex. Level 4 is where we pull all these pieces together. It's where we synthesize everything into the highest form of leadership, true strategic thinking. And here's your framework. It's simple. First, you learn. You approach every problem with that beginner's mind. Second, you leverage. You use AI as your thought partner to see around corners. Third, you listen. You apply that emotional intelligence to really get the human factor. And finally, number 4, you lead. You act with a kind of clarity and courage that only comes when you've done the first 3 steps. So the crucial takeaway here is this. Strategy is no longer a static plan you put in a binder. It is a dynamic, living synthesis of continuous learning, technological leverage, and deep human insights. That, right there, is modern strategy. So we've built the framework, but there is one final grounding principle that makes sure it all actually works in the long run. Here is the final important realization. You have to adopt the long view. You have to embrace the power of patience and timeless mental models. And for this, who better to turn to than a master of long-term thinking, Warren Buffett. He had that famous line, "The stock market is a device for transferring money from the impatient to the patient." You know, that's not just wisdom about finance, that is a core principle of strategy. And this is the essential paradox that great leaders have to master. Yeah, speed in execution is vital. You've got to move with urgency. But patience in judgment, the patience to let a sound strategy actually unfold, to build a strong culture, to develop your people, that is what creates true, lasting value. So we've laid out the entire ascent, from learning to leveraging to leading with empathy, and then synthesizing it all with a long-term view. You have the map for the future, right here. The final question is the only one that really matters. Do you have the patience to see it through?
So we've just walked through this incredible story of transformation, right? We saw how a focus on empathy and a real learning mindset can completely reshape a company, a culture.
After going through all of that together, what's the one big idea that's really sticking with you?
Yeah, this isn't about memorizing a bunch of bullet points. It's more about taking a quiet moment to revisit the core lessons we kind of uncovered together on this journey.
It really boils down to these 5 foundational truths. First, that culture isn't just some fluffy, nice-to-have thing. It directly shapes performance. Then we saw how empathy is the real engine for innovation. It helps you see the things that everyone else misses. And this one's huge. The shift from needing to be the one who knows everything to being the one who's always learning. And of course, leaders are the ones who create the environment where that's even possible. And finally, technology, well, it's just an amplifier for whatever mindset is already there.
And that's the real question, isn't it? It's one thing to nod along and understand these ideas. It's a completely different thing to actually weave them into how you work, how you lead. So how do we bridge that gap? How do you get from insight to actual action? Well, this is where the real work begins. And honestly, it's where the real reward is too. It's all about consciously choosing your path forward. Moving from just taking in ideas to actively going out and creating your own impact.
So where do you even start? Look, it doesn't have to be some grand, complicated plan. It can start really quietly. First, just take a moment for yourself. Reflect on your own mindset. Where does this stuff resonate with you? Then, maybe you share that with your team. Just open up a conversation. And from there, you can start to build things. Not by accident, but with real, shared intention. And helping you on that journey, that's exactly why we do what we do here. This channel is all about being a space that helps you think better, grow with intention, and ultimately build something that has a lasting impact.
This conversation absolutely doesn't have to end here. If these ideas connect with you, we'd really love for you to stay connected with us. It's honestly less about getting another subscriber and more about continuing this shared journey of learning and growth together.
So let's end on this one thought. I think it's the single most important takeaway. Your growth, your career, your impact, none of it is an accident. It all comes down to the choices you make and the intention you bring to your work every single day. So the question that remains is really for you. What are you going to build with intention?